Hi, this is Craig Smith. In the 32 years that I've been studying gold and precious metals, banking, geopolitical events in America, economics, it's amazing the information that's at our fingertips today. And I compiled some on my desk, and I won't read each one of the headlines to you, but I saw something the other day that just startled me. And it was when the SEC decided that the most liquid cash asset that has been known to be risk-free in America, that's money market funds, now under a crisis can have a delay in your withdrawal and even have a fee charged to you to get your money out of a money market fund. Now, isn't that hard to believe? To me, that was very, very hard to believe. Well, I did a little homework and I found out that that was in the Dodd-Frank legislation. It failed the House, it failed the Senate, but guess what? The SEC passed a regulation. In other words, what they can't get through in legislation now, they're doing through regulation now. And that troubles me. Because you had the IMF come out the other day, and the Bank of International Settlement, which, by the way, just so you know, the Bank of International Settlement is the central bank for all the central banks. In other words, our central bank is the Federal Reserve. The Bank of England is the central bank for England. The Bank of International Settlement is the central bank for all the central banks. That they said that right now we are in worse problems, we're in worse trouble, we're in worse risk than we were pre-Lehman collapse in 2008. Now, if that didn't make headline news all across America, I don't know what could. That we're in worse shape today than we were in 2008, and that we run more of a systemic problem today. Then I saw this article, and I will have to refer to it, out of the Salt Lake Tribune, where it says, if stress tests were real, most banks would fail. Now, I want you to think about this for a minute. And then I go and I see this. U.S. banks brace for large deposit outflows. U.S. banks are steeling themselves, meaning strengthening themselves, for the possibility of losing up to $1 trillion in deposits. J.P. Morgan themselves are expecting to see $100 billion worth of withdrawals because of what the Federal Reserve has done in changing their policy that will change a lot of what goes on Wall Street. And so for years, people could say, well, it's no big deal. You know, they've got the contagion crisis under cover and everything's going to be okay. But it's not. Think about what happened just the other day. Banco Espírito Santo in Portugal. They needed a 6.6 billion euro bailout. 6.6 billion euros were necessary to save this bank. And I could give you another dozen banks in Europe that are in the same trouble. 11 countries now are deemed by Moody and S&Ps to be bankrupt. Now, if that doesn't frighten the average person in the country or in the world, I don't know what does. The point is, our financial system has never been in worse shape. That's why our recent book that we just sent to the printer entitled Don't Bank on It, we're going to show you how banks years ago used to protect us from the Jesse James and the Al Capones and the John Dillingers, the ones that would rob the banks so that our money was safe. In fact, our bankers have reversed the tables, have reversed the roles. They are now robbing us. And they're taking that money and giving it to politicians that change regulations that get them more money in their banks so that they can keep this circle of money going back to the politicians and perpetuate power, connected power in Washington, D.C. literally forever. And yet it can't work over the long term. And here's my final point. This is what I want you to all consider. We had a crisis in 2008. If this was September 12th of 2008, and you were watching this, and I said to you, within 2 days, you're going to see Lehman Brothers, one of the largest stock brokerage firm and investment banks that was created during the Civil War is getting ready to go bankrupt, you just shut the camera off. And yet 3 days later it happened. Do you remember J.P. Morgan was merged with Bear Stearns? Merrill Lynch was forced to merge with Bank of America. And next thing you know, we said, no, we're not going to save Lehman Brothers. And quote unquote, quote, the world was hanging by a thread. And all of a sudden we needed $787 billion worth of government money to save the system. And guess what? We put that legislation in front of Congress and they fought it for a week and we didn't get a TARP. And another week went by and they said, if we don't get this legislation by Friday, the markets won't open on Sunday. Singapore won't open. Hong Kong won't open. The whole system will come apart at the seams. And guess what? They didn't pass it. And the markets didn't come apart at the seams. Yes, the stock market pulled back, but the system didn't fall apart. And then the next week, they went back to the Senate and the Congress, and they added $85 billion worth of pork barrel spending. $85 billion worth of your and my tax money that's going to go to pay for special pet projects, pork as it's known. And guess what? TARP passed immediately. And all of a sudden there was $787 billion to bail out the likes of AIG so that they could bail out the likes of Goldman Sachs and Societe Generale and many foreign banks. Now I only bring all this to your attention for one reason. I'm going to make this very, very brief. We have the central bank of central bankers telling us that we're in worse shape today than we were in 2008 pre-Lehman collapse. Our too big to fail banks are now 37% larger than they were before. We have newspaper article after newspaper article saying if the banks were truly stress tested properly, they would fail. You have banks announcing that they are bracing themselves for over $1 trillion worth of withdrawal. And they're trying to see if they'll be able to handle that. Or is the government going to have to print money to once again bail them out? Because guess what? This time there won't be a bailout. There'll be a bail-in. Your money that's sitting in that deposit will be deemed a bank asset. And you'll have to fight to get your money back. And if you don't believe me, I challenge you with something. If you've got $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 in the bank, take your checkbook and go down to the bank. And walk into the bank and say, I'd like to cash a check for $12,000 and I'd like to leave with $12,000 in cash. And watch what happens. You won't leave that bank with the cash. Oh, they'll tell you they'll give you a bank draft, or they'll give you a counter check, or they'll maybe give you a cashier's check. But they won't give you the cash. They'll tell you they don't have the cash, that the cash is not there to give you. And they may even ask you, what do you need the cash for? We document all this in our book. We have several situations where this happened. And by the way, it's just not happening in America. It's happening in England. It's happening at the HSBC Bank in many other foreign locations. J.P. Morgan itself, the other day, reduced withdrawals to $50,000 cash per statement. In other words, every 30, you can't take more than $50,000 cash out within a 30-day period. And they've restricted you from doing international wire transfers. Capital controls. The point is, any day we can have another banking crisis. And don't look at Wall Street and say, oh, look at how Wall Street's 17,000, everything's okay. The system is fine. No, because here's the problem. In 2008, we didn't have a business cycle problem. It wasn't just a slow economy. We had a financial crisis. We had a monetary crisis. And how did we address it? The same way we caused it. We caused the crisis by zero interest rates, by flooding the money with by flooding the market with money, with cash. What have we just done over the last 6 years? We've kept interest rates at zero, created $4.5 trillion on the Fed balance sheet, and have done everything expecting we're just in a cyclical problem. That once the business cycle turns, everything will be okay. Well, guess what? Now the post-mortem on 2008 shows us that it wasn't a business cycle problem, it was structural problems. Structural problems in our entitlement programs, structural problems in our bank debt, structural problems in our government debt, structural problems in our personal debt. And I commend you if you're one of the Americans who have reduced your debt, have paid down your mortgages, or maybe you've even had to walk away from your home where you don't have that mortgage debt, or you've reduced your car debt. That's terrific. That's what our American government should be doing. We should be on an austerity program. But no, the government says spend, spend, spend. That's how we get that. The GDP, 72% of the GDP is consumption. So just go out and spend all the money you can and we'll be fine. We're not going to be fine. And that's why I wrote this book called Don't Bank on It. And I leave you with this final thought. When the banks say they're getting ready for huge withdrawals, when the head of the Bank of International Settlement, the central banks are saying, we're in big trouble. We've got a crisis that's brewing that's worse than what happened in Lehman in 2008. When you've got newspaper articles saying our banks won't pass the stress tests, when you have banks going out of business unless government come in like the Portuguese and bail them out with 6.6 billion euros, what does that tell you? It tells you that you could be somebody just like the poor people in Cyprus, who one day woke up and their banks were closed. And when their banks finally did open up to 100,000 euro, you recovered. Anything over 100,000 euro, you lost 47% of your money. Are you prepared to lose 47% of your money? People say, that can't happen in America. Really? They said the same thing about England. That England was a superpower, it was an empire. It could never lose its reserve status, its reserve currency status. The pound sterling was the reserve currency of the world. They were blessed beyond recognition. And guess what? The reality is they're no longer the reserve currency, so don't think it can't happen to us.
Okay, great. Yeah,